Richard Nixon was a proven, well-respected Republican who many felt was the next great leader of the United States. In the 1960 election, however, Vice President Nixon lost to an inexperienced senator from Massachusetts, John F. Kennedy. A phenomenon, the results of this election are only explicable in the context of 1960, a year of change politically, socially, and technologically. The year was 1960, and America was changing. The bitter memories of the Second World War slowly faded as a post-war generation matured. This generation would be defined by domestic prosperity and international insecurity. The Cold War loomed with the spread of communism threatening domestic security. But at home, employment was high and per capita income rose 50% from 1945, resulting in the rise of consumerism. The number of household television sets shot from 8,000 in 1946 to 47 million in 1961. 88% of families owned a TV, creating an accessible popular culture complete with rock and roll, Elvis, and the dance craze, the twist. Overall, optimism defined the future with the possibility of space exploration and the hopes of the civil rights movement. Television was the growing medium through which people accessed information, and television would play an important role in the 1960 election. Given the 1960s context, Vice President Richard Nixon appeared to be the ideal candidate to lead in the Cold War era. He began his political career in 1946, entering Congress as a representative from California. Having quickly risen the ranks of the United States Navy, Nixon used his leadership experience in the military to advance his career politically. In 1950, Nixon ascended to the Senate, where he gained a reputation for tough on communism. Republican Party leaders took note and recommended Nixon for vice president in 1952, joining the Dwight D. Eisenhower ticket. During the two terms Eisenhower and Nixon served office, the role of vice president expanded greatly. Gaining viable experience domestically and internationally, Nixon attended cabinet and national security meetings at home, also traveling to Latin America and Africa on goodwill missions. In a famous exchange during his 1959 visit to the Soviet Union, Nixon engaged with Premier Nikita Khrushchev in an informal kitchen debate, solidifying his expertise on foreign policy and reputation for tough on communism. Nixon established himself as a leader of the Republican Party. Going into the 1960 election, Nixon certainly possessed the makings of the president. John F. Kennedy, the Democratic candidate, lacked what Nixon possessed: accomplishments, experience, and respect. But the young senator embodied the futuristic optimism of 1960. After his Harvard education, Kennedy joined the Navy, where he earned notoriety as a war hero. Running on his heroism, Kennedy entered Congress in 1946 as a representative from Massachusetts. He rose to the Senate in 1952 despite an unremarkable and seemingly disinterested term. His 8 years in the Senate were plagued with lingering health complications as a result of Addison's disease. His attendance and reputation suffered. Further complicating the presidential bid, Kennedy was Catholic amongst a largely Protestant majority. Odds were certainly against him, yet John Kennedy defeated Nixon in the election despite all odds. How did Kennedy pull off one of the greatest political upsets in our nation's history? John F. Kennedy's utilization of the emerging medium of television allowed this unexperienced senator to win the 1960 election, forever changing political campaigns. At the 1956 Democratic National Convention in Chicago, television transforms John F. Kennedy from an unknown senator into a Democrat of note. Appearing as the on-screen narrator of a convention video, Kennedy gained attention for his poise and good looks. William Shannon of the New York Post described Kennedy's ascension, quote, "He came before the convention tonight as a movie star." The 1960 election saw 5 contenders vying for the Democratic nomination, including party leaders Adlai Stevenson and Majority Senate Leader Lyndon B. Johnson. At a disadvantage, Kennedy needed to win in the primaries to secure his nomination. Facing off against Senator Hubert Humphrey of Minnesota, Kennedy took advantage of every opportunity to appear on television, becoming what TV critic Jack Gould would describe as, quote, "the most telegenic person in public life." Humphrey, the only Democratic candidate without a millionaire's fortune, could not match Kennedy's campaign contribution. In the Wisconsin race, Kennedy spent twice as much as Humphrey. The highly contested West Virginia primary yielded an even greater inequality, with Humphrey spending $2,000 on television ads in comparison to Kennedy's $34,000 television expenditure. Growing frustrated, Humphrey decried We are not in American politics to select a lead star for a Hollywood drama. Going into the Democratic National Convention in mid-July, Kennedy led in the polls, but party leaders Stevenson and Johnson predicted last-minute maneuvers could gain the nomination on a second ballot vote. Johnson targeted Kennedy's absenteeism, rallying, quote, "Although some of my opponents answered none of the 45 roll calls, I answered all." To which Kennedy's charm and ease in front of cameras proved no match.
Delegates today, let me just say that I appreciate what Senator Johnson had to say. He made some general references to perhaps the shortcomings of other presidential candidates, but as he was not specific, I assume he was talking about some of the other candidates and not about me.
The New Frontier speech, alluding to Franklin D. Roosevelt's New Deal speech, gained Kennedy additional media attention and established the campaign question he would run on: who can better get the country moving?
A new frontier is here, whether we seek it or not. Beyond that frontier are uncharted areas of science and space, unsolved problems of peace and war, unconquered province of ignorance and prejudice, unanswered questions of poverty and surplus.
As second in command to the popular Eisenhower, the Nixon campaign would focus on continuation. In choosing a running partner, Nixon decided on Henry Cabot Lodge. As ambassador to the United Nations, Lodge possessed experience and foreign policy expertise to complement Nixon's own strength. Nixon and Lodge ran on this campaign question: who better understands what peace demands? As the general election moved into high gear, differences between the candidates' media strategies became apparent. The highly organized, intelligently strategized Kennedy campaign effectively utilized media. Using on-location shooting, upbeat campaign jingles, and celebrity endorsements, Kennedy's appearance on television grew his star image and support base. Additionally, the Kennedy camp released transcripts of the candidates' speeches, making it easier for the press to compose articles about the campaign. His team was a finely oiled machine, ensuring proper preparation for events, targeted advertisements, and carefully crafted speech rhetoric. Ted Sorensen, Kennedy's speechwriter, described the campaign, quote, "We were organized in such a way that all the candidate had to do was show up." Leonard Hall, one of Nixon's 3 campaign managers, describes, quote, "Dick is his own manager and makes his own decisions. He did not seek nor take advice from experts or advisors. His media advisors suggested using 30-minute television segments to cover topics like Khrushchev and Kennedy's Senate record. Nixon pocket vetoed these ideas and continued his ill-conceived campaign promise to visit all 50 states. The rigorous travel schedule left him ill and unable to fill proper advertisements. Nixon instead preferred to sit in front of the camera and talk, leaving his ads dull. Kennedy's September 12th address to the Greater Houston Ministerial Association showcased the senator's television appeal and effectively eliminated the religious question. In response to a petition including 150 Protestant clergy signatures, Kennedy seamlessly addressed his Catholicism.
I am the Democratic Party's candidate for president, who happens also to be a Catholic. I do not speak for my church on public matters, and the church does not speak for me.
Argued by many as the highlight of the fall campaign from either candidate, the Kennedy camp utilized the footage, circulating 300 to 400 copies for rebroadcast on local television. On September 26, 1960, in the first televised presidential debate in American history, Kennedy and Nixon faced off in domestic policy as 77 million people watched, over 60% of the adult population. Kennedy appeared handsome and confident, opening the debate with a statement comparing the half-slave or half-free nature of the 1960s to the racial predicament of Abraham Lincoln in the 1860 election. Kennedy states, "I think it's time America started moving again." Nixon, unprepared and unconfident, appeared pale and unshaven. He was ill due to an infection of the knee he had been in the hospital seeking treatment for. Kennedy was well rested and extremely well prepared for his appearance. His sickly appearance and lack of manipulation of the camera cost him in the televised debate. Those watching the debate declared Kennedy won. The Kennedy campaign capitalized on this victory using television clips of his opening statement with Nixon's disturbed reaction. Winning by a margin of 112,803 votes, John F. Kennedy won the election, receiving 49.7% of the popular vote, compared to Nixon's 49.6%. The younger, inexperienced senator defeated the veteran, well-respected vice president. This marked a significant change. Described by prominent journalist Walter Lippmann, quote, 1960 marks the passing of the old political generation to the new.